Alrighty, so this is going to be the recording for our Substance Painter tutorial. Now, since we're going to be kind of focusing on the book, what we're going to do is just select either of these guys. Doesn't really matter which one. So just select one of your books, and we are going to export this out as an FBX file. So we're going to select a book. We're going to go up to File, Export Selection, and when you go into your export selection options, down under File Type, I still have mine set to OBJ from before when we were doing some of the UV mapping, but just look for the FBX Export file type. Now, as far as where you guys put this thing, because I think it's going to be really important that we kind of keep all of our folders organized, and we're going to have obviously a bunch of painter projects for each material we're doing. So I really don't want to have all these source textures and painter projects all just scattered in different folders. Now you guys can kind of pick however you want to organize everything. What I would recommend you do, and what I ended up doing, is inside of your VSD project, I started making, where is it? I started making a painter folder, and I'm just dropping in subfolders inside of that just to kind of keep all of my painter information. So for what you guys could maybe do for right now is just go in your VSD project. You probably have the same folders I'm looking at right here, like OBJ, IES. Inside of that, just make a brand new folder and call it Painter. And then in the Painter folder, make a new folder and let's call that Book. And obviously we're going to do that for every object. So we're going to do another folder in here for the scraper, the pulley. We'll do one, for the shelf and the wall. So again, in your VSD project, make a painter folder, and then make another folder in that called book. And we're going to put everything, like the FBX file, all that stuff is going to go in here. So I'm going to do the export real quick. So select the book, File, Export Selection, change it to FBX. I'm going to find the right directory. I'll stick with the lecture project for mine, so it's a little easier.
I'll get a warning I'm able to export some materials?
Yes, yeah, that because there's a RenderMan material on there, and it probably has no idea what that is. Yeah, okay. You're all going to get that same error where it's probably warning you guys about a RenderMan material, not knowing what to do with it. You can ignore that. I think it'll export it out with a Lambert if it can't figure out what the material is. All right, let's try this again. Lecture, painter, book. So inside of there, once I kind of make the FBX format, I'll just call this book. Easy enough. We're not really going to change anything over here in the settings. You can just export selection. There's that warning that you guys are probably seeing. I know every time we see a warning, we panic. This one's not a big deal. It just doesn't know what the RenderMan material is. So we're out of that. Now, we've kind of got this guy already set up. I don't really need Maya open at this point, and I'd kind of recommend maybe just closing out of Maya altogether. But if you guys do want to preview your textures, we'll be covering the export process, and we can show you how to bring that stuff back in. Let's go into Painter.
If there's an asset that compiles it, you can separate it into multiple pieces. Should we separate it and then export it?
What? Say it again.
Say we imported the scraper, will we have to separate it before we import it to Painter?
Each piece of the scraper? No. What separating the object's going to do is that would give you something called different texture sets, which would mean in Painter, if Painter thinks there's different objects, like if you broke the blade apart from the handle, it means in Painter you could treat those as different materials if you wanted to, if you felt that was useful to you. But I know before we were doing that, when we were the older way in Photoshop, we used to break the blade and the handle apart because it was easier to do it that way. But in Painter, because it's so easy just to pick what each part of the object's going to look like anyway, you're not really going to have to worry about that. So I would just kind of keep the scraper all as one mesh and just kind of leave it like that. But for now, we're just doing the book anyway. The scraper's not going to come up until next Wednesday. All right, so we got Painter open. How many of you guys have used Painter before? I know there's a few. Kobe, you've used Painter.
Oh, yeah,
amazing.
Yeah.
What crazy. I didn't know you used this software at all.
Yeah, no, I'm so terrible at it, actually.
Yep. We know. So I know a few of you guys have used it a little bit. It's a really fun software to use. It's so much more enjoyable to texture things compared to the Photoshop method. Now, the big thing for us is we need to bring these assets in here and start figuring out how do we set up some of the basics.
Quick
So,
question.
yeah.
Every time I open Painter, I have a double window.
Oh, are you seeing like this?
Yes.
Yep. If you guys, is everyone else seeing the double window where it's like in two panels? Yeah, so if you're seeing the double window, it's not a big deal. This will make more sense in a second. If you want, you can hit F2 or F3, and that will put it to a single window. But what you're kind of seeing with the double is you're seeing a 3D view and a 2D view side by side. But for now, just ignore that. I'll show you that in a second. So at the top of Painter, let's do File, New. Okay, so inside this, we have a new project. Now, the first thing it wants to do is understand what template we're going to use. So if you kind of click through this, really this is just Painter trying to understand, are you using like specular properties, roughness properties? Like each renderer has certain things it's kind of using to calculate the way light and reflections work, like the way normal maps work. We don't really need to change this. Obviously, you can change it if you know where you're going. Like if you're going into Unity or Unreal, you could pick one of their presets and just use that. We're going to stick with the good old classic PBR metallic roughness. This is kind of like a good tried and true method that works with pretty much everything. And we can eventually are going to convert that to something that works with RenderBand. So we're not going to change this at all. Leave that at default, PBR metallic roughness. Now notice under mesh, there's nothing here. So you're going to hit select. Next to it says mesh. This is going to pop up. And then I want you guys to find that FBX file. And you probably have it saved in like that subfolder like I had you set up. But look for that book FBX file and then hit open. That's just going to load it as our mesh for this project. Okay, after you've done that, we have a normal map format. We're going to leave this as DirectX. Now, we can change this thing. This is going to kind of change what happens inside of RenderBand when we convert from like Painter into RenderBand. Like you might notice that the way the light interacts with the surface, like it's acting like something concave is pulling out, almost like you have an inverted bump map. You guys all kind of remember how bump maps work, like white and black. So this isn't really going to be too terribly important right now because we can always edit this later, but we are going to stick with DirectX. But one thing we do want to change, which we also could change later, is going to be the resolution. Now it's kind of cool because inside of Painter, even if you like end up knowing, or let's say you're going to do like a 4K texture for some massive asset in a scene, you can always change this later and go down to like a 512 just to make it faster when you're working on it, and then up-res it later. So you're not really ever locked into any of these. But we are going to stick with 2048, and we might down-res it if it gets kind of slow. And we're going to skip this guy right here. We're not doing any low-res meshes for normal maps. Okay, so that's all we need to do here. You can then hit OK. And it's just going to give it a second. You guys should see something kind of like this that just appeared. And this is your 3D view. So if you guys kind of look around, use your Maya controls. It's very, very similar. You know, like Option middle mouse, Option left click is tumble. Option right mouse kind of zooms in and out. So if you're obviously familiar with Maya, you're going to feel kind of at home with this. It's the exact same control set for this. So we're looking at the 3D view and the 2D view side by side. What I'm going to say we do for now is maybe just stick with the 3D view. So if you ever want to change these, you have a couple ways to do it. At the top here, there's a button where you can go between your different 2D, 3D, or split views. But it's also the function keys. So just using F1, 2, and 3, you should be able to toggle between those. I'm going to stick with this one. So we're just going to look at it in 3D. Now, one of the really big things that we want to do before we do any materials, any texturing, is we need to bake mesh maps. So baking mesh maps is basically going to give us the ability to have a lot of Painter's tools and procedurals work with like normal direction, world space coordinates. It'll understand where there's curved geometry using a curvature map. It'll use shadow detail from occlusion. Because a lot of these tools in here need to know how the object is constructed. And to do that, it needs mesh maps. So for us to do the mesh maps, if you kind of look at the right side of Painter, like over here, see there's a bunch of buttons. Just kind of click through them real quick, just so you can kind of see what they all look like. I'll zoom in. So the first one is this thing called texture set. Now, if we had multiple objects on the FBX file, this would be where you see those split up. So Norman, like earlier when you're talking about the scraper, if you had broken the blade and the handle up, you would have seen two different things here possibly. We're going to rename this though from neutral gray. That's the material name. Let's give this something different. I'm just going to double click and just call it book. You have a question too?
Yeah, I only see 4 and I don't see the top 2.
You only see... Yeah, question.
Oh, I'm seeing like the UV or the edges on mine. Like there's like red edges. Like,
Oh, yeah. You're seeing like a red wireframe? Yeah, you're probably on, does it look like this?
Yeah, I was using the F1, F2, and I think that's what I did.
Yeah, it could have been you accidentally clicked on the Polygon Fill. If you go back to brush, that might get rid of it.
Yes.
Yeah. That'll come up again later when we start painting. So this is going to be your texture set. We're not really too worried about that at the moment because there's only one object and one material. But below that, we have texture set settings. So this is where Painter wants to know what type of maps you're going to create. All these guys right here, base color, height, roughness, metallic, normal, these are all part of that PBR metallic preset that we picked when we started the project. So and I'll kind of come back to this and I'll explain to you kind of what these are doing once we get a material on here. But do you guys already feel like you understand what those 5 mean? Are there any that you have no clue what that represents? Like, you know how like when you're doing texturing with shading and lighting, you're doing like different types of black and white maps going into different attributes?
These are just like all of the maps that's going to be exported for you.
Yes. Yeah, they're going to be converted a little bit to something different, but these are basically the maps we're going to use inside of Maya. I mean, base color is your texture color. Height, you can kind of think of it almost like, it kind of acts like a bump map where it just needs to know what's going up and down. So it's just your height detail. Roughness controls the specularity of the surface, how rough or sharp the highlight is. Metallic is if you have metals, is it tinted. And a normal map is going to be basically our better version of a bump map. But we're going to leave all this the same. And down here in the bottom right, you'll see where it says Mesh Maps, Bake Mesh Maps. We're going to hit this button because we don't currently have anything loaded as a mesh map. So hit this guy right here, Bake Mesh Maps. And a new window is going to pop up. These are all the different maps that we can create just to help Painter understand what the geometry looks like. We're only going to use a few of these guys. So you can uncheck normal. We don't need normal. We are not going to need ID for this one. And we don't need thickness. So just keep world space normal, ambient occlusion, curvature, and position turned on. But as far as like when you kind of click on them, you'll see that some of these guys will bring you to like to different settings. Like if you ever wanted to change something. These default settings are pretty good. We're not even going to worry about it. So just make sure you have those 4 checked. And then you're going to hit Bake Mesh Maps down at the bottom. It might take a second, but it's going to start calculating your information. And mine is done. Did you guys see some new things pop in down here? It probably looks almost exactly like that. It should look identical. Okay, so those are the maps. They're now there. Okay, let's close that out. Now, if you ever want to see what the maps look like, there's some different ways to view those right on the surface. If you guys hit the B button on your keyboard, hit B, just kind of cycle through it. This is the B key.
Real quick, you said uncheck normal, or did you say world space normal?
Uncheck normal. Keep world space normal turned on. And if you ever mess it up, you can rebake the maps. You can see right here, If any of these feel like they're broken, you can hit the X, delete it, redo it. So this is world space normal. This is kind of showing you in three-dimensional space where the different parts of the object are. So this means you could have something like interact with the top of the surface. Like if you wanted a light to hit the top and get like a dust effect where dust is kind of settled from the air and kind of landed on the top of the book, we could use that. And let me go back, and there's occlusion, some kind of cool shadow detail, kind of grainy. Curvature looks a little aliased. We can kind of see what curvature is trying to do. We're showing you like where you have bevels and corners. So this is going to be kind of interesting because eventually we can use this to do like wear and tear where you might have had some like contact detail. So we might do this to break up the leather on the book. Now, if you ever are kind of done looking at the maps, like your mesh maps, you'll kind of notice at the top here in the 3D view, you can always pick what type of map you want to look at. Every time you hit B, you're just cycling through these guys right here. B is just going through all these. When you're done, you can click back on material at the top, or if you like using your hotkeys, if you hit the M key on your keyboard, M for material, that will put you back to material. So B for the mesh maps, M for material. Okay, everybody feeling pretty good so far? All right, let's try getting a material in here. Like we'll just start with the preset, and we're just going to see how that looks on the surface. So let me kind of bring up some of the reference here. So we just kind of got this set up the other day, but like inside that the documentation for this project, you can kind of walk through this or kind of look through it. It'll sort of guide you through the general kind of goal for this project. But this thing right at the top called reference images, this is going to be a link to all the different photos we've taken of the various objects. Now, obviously, some of these are not the book. Just a hunch. That's not a book. But you'll notice that we do have a few kind of scattered in here that are the same object we're trying to recreate. Some are close up. We have some at different perspective where we've kind of stacked the books together. And it's just going to give you guys some kind of good ideas of what effects we're trying to create. Staining, little like marks in areas where it's been kind of scratched, damage on like the leather. The cloth has been really beat up with some kind of interesting stain patterns. So we're going to use these as we kind of build this material. We want to start with just getting kind of a really nice leather material across the whole surface, and then we'll kind of see what that looks like. So kind of ignore this layer section for a second. You guys see the shelf kind of at the bottom? And I was kind of clicking through here earlier just to show you all these different kind of areas you can work with, like brushes and grunge patterns. We're going to start off with one of the most basic things, which is just a really good material preset. So if you click on materials, these are all the materials that Painter comes with. But this is not all the materials that exist out there for Painter. If you guys ever go onto Algorithmic's site, they actually have a bunch of like other materials you can download for free. There's also other ones that are like more official that you can pay money for. But there are way more than this. There's like hundreds and hundreds of these guys that are up on their site. Some obviously don't look great, but you can kind of check those out at your leisure. Let's look for leather. Now, you can kind of scroll through here and find stuff, but if you just go to the search box and start typing in some keywords, it'll try to filter things out for you. So if I just type in leather, you'll notice a bunch of things still pop up. Okay, and if you put your mouse over it, it'll kind of show you a little preview of generally what it would look like. Artificial leather, leather bag, big grain, medium grain, rough, soft, sci-fi artificial, fancy. Well, let's just try like applying some of these. I know that they're not going to be like a perfect match for this thing, but let me kind of click on one to zoom it in. You can kind of see generally what it's supposed to look like. I'm more concerned about just the pattern of the bump. Like, how it has almost like a cellular kind of look to it. That's sort of what we're looking for. We can change the color later. So let's try applying a couple of these. What we could do is just grab any of them, drag them up to the layers. I'm grabbing like the leather bag, but I just want you guys to kind of see what that looks like.
There's a smart material that matches it very closely.
Let me see.
It's the leatherette damaged.
Leather damaged?
Leatherette damaged.
Leatherette damage. That one? That is really close. This is a smart material. This one's a little different. Oh, that's real. Yeah, the cells are a little
You can just shrink them.
questionable. Yeah, they're not too bad, but that's actually also a really good starting point. I'd be okay with you guys using that. If you want to use the leatherette one, you can use it. This one's kind of interesting because a smart material has all these other things already built into it. Like it has, you can see if you open the folder up, there's like all these like sub layers in there, different patterns, something using like height, damages, and you can turn off different parts and just see like what it's doing. I'm gonna remove this, and I'm gonna try to build this more from scratch before we start getting into like smart materials. Let me kind of go back here. And I'm just gonna kind of drag a couple on here, and if I don't like the way it looks, we're gonna remove it. So leather, big grain, don't really see much grain on that. And you'll notice every time you drag one in here that there's all these settings down in the bottom right that you can always modify. And if you kind of, like, it'll tell you what material properties are on that material. This one has color, height, roughness, metallic. There's technical parameters. There's like normal intensity sliders. Some of these don't necessarily work. This one seems to not have much of anything.
So every time you kind of like drag a layer over, it adds to like.
Yeah, like if you like don't delete the previous one, they're just stacking on top of each other. And so if you have a bunch in here, you might notice that they're covering the previous one. So if you're just kind of testing things out, I would maybe just delete another material when you're done with it if you don't think it's going to work. So I'm just kind of clicking through them, seeing if any of these guys jump out. Let's check the artificial. This one's actually not bad. This one's kind of interesting. So I didn't think this one was going to work too well initially because it's just like it's a dark color. But one thing I do like about the artificial one is I feel like the bump and height detail is a little closer to what we were seeing in the reference. Let me check out that sci-fi one too. That actually looks the same. Hold on a second. Okay. I don't know if that was really necessary for the sci-fi version of that. That is like the exact same thing.
It might have been pulling channels from the layer below it.
Could be.
Have them both there.
Maybe, yeah. Oh, yeah, like they're blending. That could be the case. Yeah, I'm going to stick with artificial leather, I think, for this one. So we've kind of dragged this guy in here. Now, looking back at the reference, though, there's a couple of big things that we know are off, right? The color doesn't match, and what do you guys feel about like the height and like that bump detail compared to like what we're getting right here?
Definitely, it's a start. Like, if it was real, just a tad bit of a.
Yeah, it's like a lot of the height detail just needs to be exaggerated. It's not really as like the pockets and crevices between the little cells is not nearly deep enough. We can do a bunch of tweaking to this guy to get it to be a lot closer. So if you kind of look down at the properties, just kind of scroll down, you'll see that we have some different mapping types, like is it a UV projection, is it triplanar? UV projection just means that in the 2D view, so I'm hitting like F3, UV projection just means, like according to the UVs, it's just blanketing it like a giant 2D texture, almost like you would have done this in Photoshop. A triplanar is a little different. So if you look at triplanar, just change the projection to this one and just watch the material. It's really similar, but this one doesn't just obey 2D space. This is almost like if you're projecting the texture from like all the different orthographic angles in Maya. Kind of like how you guys were doing like your XYZ planar mapping. That is sort of what this guy's trying to do. This one's really, really useful because occasionally what you're going to run into with some of these objects, like with the scraper and the pulley, you'll notice that some of your materials have really bad seams, like where the UV shells stop. This guy will help us get around that issue where it will completely ignore any of the texture seams.
So what's the point of the other one if this is like superior?
It's not the reason this one is not always the best choice is because since this is blending multiple images together from different angles, when they overlap to blend, you'll get these blurred patches that start to appear. So really, like, it's not really like a right or wrong answer for this thing. You guys just get to pick whatever one you think looks the best. Now, this is a pretty simple surface, and the way it's UV'd, the seams aren't really noticeable. So I think in this case, I would just stick with UV. Now, another thing we could do is let's kind of go down a little farther. We'll come back to the scale and offset, but just go down farther here, and you'll notice where we have our different material settings: color, height, roughness, metallic. And below that, there are settings for those different attributes. Now, every material is going to be a little different. This one is giving us the ability to change the base color, change the height details. There's a procedural in here. We can play around with the contrast, ranges, rotation. Let's change the color first. So you guys see where it says base color? It's probably like black. Let's click on that, and we're going to get something really close. I know you guys can't really color pick like I have it. Like I have this thing up, but if that thing is up and visible, you can color pick from the reference. If you click it, there's a little eyedropper. It's a little weird and dopey because you have to kind of move the window in. You kind of scale that in. So if you guys do have the reference open, you could hit the color button, click and hold down the button on the eyedropper, and see how when I'm dragging and holding, it's trying to source the different areas. It's trying to do it. It's doing a really bad job. Really? That is not even remotely close. Let me try giving it some saturation. It might be stuck. Good job, Painter. Let's not color pick. It might be working for you guys. I'm not really getting an accurate result. So what I'm going to do, because it's not color picking, it could be because of my connected to the projector, I'm going to try to get this working myself. So I'm going to boost up the value a little bit to make it lighter, give it some saturation. You can see I'm getting like a red color. And let me kind of move this in. We're just going to try to color match it the old manual way. Okay.
Also, source color of one of the smart materials.
On the smart material?
Yeah, because there's one that's really similar.
Yeah. I think that's the one that you were talking about, Kobe, earlier. Yeah. Yeah, that one, like if you guys want to source it, you can get it working with a smart material, I'm all for it. And actually, it kind of works pretty well. I don't want to move the hue too much because I get into kind of like greens and yellows. So the hue I am definitely going to keep down. I'm just going to boost the saturation up a little bit. I think that's probably workable. Maybe just a little lower. So just get something as close as you can. Try to match the color. Now the other big thing that I'm kind of seeing is going to be the height detail. Like see how those are way more bumpy and defined? This feels a little kind of like bland. It's not really as rough and kind of bumpy as I'd like. There are going to be some ways to do this though. So right here we have height. There's some information for it. We have seed, balance, and contrast. And if I keep going down here, you'll notice there's roughness controls. We need to try to fix the height. So between balance and contrast, like I think all we need to do is exaggerate the contrast on this to make it much more defined. So I'm going to try moving contrast up. See what's happening to my cell detail? Is yours getting a little sharper when you do that? It depends what material you're using. If you're using a smart material, this may or may not be there. Because again, they all have different controls. That appears to be a little better. And I'm going to move the balance. Now balance is kind of interesting because if I move this around, you can kind of see how it's clipping out different areas. Like I'm making flat spots. I'm going to leave this in the middle for balance. But I'm just exaggerating the contrast a bit more. And you can also do the same thing with roughness. Now, roughness is like, notice how on the top of my book, see all those like little various kind of like dry and wet patches across the whole surface? That is the roughness area. Roughness, you can do the same thing. Just move it around, look at the way the light is reflecting. Low contrast, really harsh contrast between the different patches. We can even leave it at default right now and address that later with other types of textures. And at the way bottom, there's metallic. We do not want to use that. You can see here's what metallic does, though, just in case you're curious. See how it looks like kind of like a leather right now? This is a dielectric material. If you put metallic up what happened to the book? What does it look like? It is like metal, right? It's almost like anodized metal, where you have that kind of coating on it. So this is going to take the base color and it applies that to the reflection, because that's how metals work. The reflection is now tinted from the color. This is obviously not supposed to be metallic. Looks cool, but we don't want that. So this is a pretty good starting point for the material. We're going to refine this a little bit, but there's one big problem that we're kind of running into is you'll notice that this material is on everything, right? The whole book is leather. And obviously when you guys make materials, the whole thing is not going to use the same material, right? We know that we want to break it up and put different materials on different sections. That's kind of how most things work. So how do we tell this material not to appear on certain parts? So what parts should not have the material? Yeah, like the pages, like this giant chunk on the top, right? Anywhere we see cloth, that shouldn't be there. Let's back up. Let's start with like the pages first. Now there's a bunch of ways to control where things are visible. We could either manually paint it, or because of the way this is UV'd, you'll notice that if I hit F3 and look at the UV mode, like with the 2D texture, what do you think those guys are? Yeah, those are that is the pages. So I know these three pieces here, we definitely do not want any leather at all. So let's try to set this up and remove the leather in a few spots. Oh, one cool thing too I forgot to show you guys is you can move the light around. So if you ever want to see like how the light interacts with the surface, hold down Shift on your keyboard, hold down Shift and then right click and just drag back and forth. This is Shift right clicking back and forth. You're moving the light.
Should we change the environment to industrial?
Yes, we can. That would make sense, wouldn't it? Since it's the same image we're using in Maya. Let's do that real quick. We're going to change the environment background. Now, to change this, on the top right side, you guys see where it says Display? It's the third button down. There's something called Panorama. If you ever want to see it, bring the opacity slider up. This is what the panorama one looks like. And there's like blurring. Apparently we're in a giant open field. So you can blur it, you can rotate it, there's exposure settings. We just want to bring in a brand new image though. So to do this, we want to import a new resource. Down here in the shelf, look for your environments section. So go down to the shelf, click on environments. These are the different environment maps that come with Painter. And if you guys have any HDR image you use, if you already own one, you're going to use it inside of Maya. You can obviously bring those in here and use any map you want. We're going to use the industrial one. So to import a new resource, right at the top here, you guys see where it says that little import resource button? Right here. Yeah, hit that little guy right there with the little arrow pointing into a square. You're going to see it bring up a new window. At the top where it says Add Resources, hit the button. A new window is going to pop up, and I want you guys to find that industrial EXR file. It's in your source images of the project. So look for that industrial EXR file, the same one in your lab project. And hit Open. Okay, once you've got that in there, you've loaded it in, it wants to know where this is going to be visible inside of Painter. So we see where it says Undefined. Click the button. Think of it more of like a flag, where this is just Painter's way to kind of keep things organized. Is it like an alpha? Is it an environment map? Is it just a texture you're using? This is an environment. So we're going to pick environment right here. And then down at the bottom where it says import your resources to, you're going to hit that drop down. And this is now asking you, how do you want this map stored? Like, do you want this permanently in Painter? Do you want it just for today? Or do you want this to be in the project the whole time you use the book? To me, I think it would make sense to have it in the book project forever. So we are going to pick Project PBR Metallic Roughness. If you do current session, when you close out a painter, the next time you go in, it'll be gone. So I'm going to pick this one. And let's hit import.
What were you doing with the undefined before?
Pick environment. What you guys should notice is if you're still in that environment section of Painter, did you guys see the industrial file just show up on the list? There's mine right there. Notice how much darker this is than the other guys. It's a pretty dark, it's like an interior, almost like a warehouse. So this is going to be a lot darker when we use it. All you have to do is just drag that right into the viewer. And just give it a second, it'll update. There it is. This is the industrial lighting. But again, the same thing. You can shift right click, you can rotate it. And if you go into your display settings, that third button down on the right, you'll play through all these guys. Opacity, exposure, rotation. Be kind of careful with exposure because if you make it like insanely bright, it might mean that you're like making your textures too intense or too dark the whole time. I maybe wouldn't play with the exposure very much. Kind of keep that the way it is because you didn't make it brighter in Maya, so there's no reason to make it brighter in here for some reason. Yeah.
Is there a website where we can find the free EXR files?
Yeah.
that Google puts out?
There are, so HDR images typically cost money because people sell them now. There are quite a few, I think, on RenderMan's site, aren't there?
Yeah.
I think there's a bunch, like if you go to RenderMan's website, they have a community section. I think you can download a few from there. Where else do they have those now?
HDRI Labs.
Oh yeah, HDRI Labs is another one.
Just on doing a Google search.
Yeah. If you just do a search in Google for like HDR images, you'll inevitably end up at a bunch of sites. But a lot of them will want you to pay money.
You should totally use JPEGs.
You should never use JPEGs. Do not use JPEGs at all. Ignore what he said. Unless you're trying to make me angry.
Is there a way to convert a JPEG to EXR?
No. Once if you're in a JPEG, you've already lost the data. It's gone. You can always go from like EXR to JPEG, but as soon as you go into an 8-bit JPEG, it's pretty much butchered and it's lost.
It's like trying to scale up a small image.
Yeah, yeah, very similar to that. All right, so let's try to now that we have like the display thing looking good, we got the right industrial file in there. I want to show you guys a few ways to keep this organized with grouping and folders, and we're going to set up a few masks for the weather. So the way I've kind of set up my workflow is I like to use folders for every material. So it's very similar to Photoshop. Hit the folder button at the top where you have layers. Hit folder. See a new folder show up. Drag the weather material, that layer, into the folder. You should notice you can collapse it now. You can drag it out of the folder, back into it. So you're just putting this in like a group. I'm going to name this just so it's not called folder 1. And I want to see this when we open your file. I need it to be organized so I can navigate through here and understand what's what. I'm going to call this leather group. So everything I do in this one folder right here, this group, that's all specifically for the leather. There's going to be another one for the cloth, one for the paper.
Question.
Yes.
Why are we separating them by groups in the texture sets?
Because right now we don't have different texture sets. So if we can actually use texture sets, we had like different materials and objects, but right now since it's just one material, one object, we have to find a different way to break that up. So we're going to use a lot of masking. Now masking is super powerful. Have you guys all used masking with Photoshop to some degree? Like black and white alphas? You all know what masking does though, right? What does white and black mean for a mask? Yeah, white is visible, black's not visible. Now this group, I want to control with white and black where it's visible. So to make a mask on the group, not the material, but the entire group, make sure you're selecting that folder in the group. At the top, you'll see there's a button, the second one in, called Add Mask. We're going to pick Add Black Mask. You'll notice it puts a little mask next to it. It went black. What happened to the material? It's completely gone. Because now there's no information because it thinks the material is not visible on anything. So what we need to do now is basically tell it with white color where it's going to be visible. Now to do this, we have to add something to the mask. So click that button to the left of it where it says Add Effect. This is going to be one of the most powerful and important areas we're going to use in Painter. We're going to be in this thing a lot over the next couple of weeks. And we'll break down what these are doing. But generally, think of these as like different ways to control where you see texture detail. We're going to use one called Paint. This one's pretty simple. So we're going to make sure that we have the mask selected, not this part. Click on the mask. Go up top and add a paint effect. Did you guys notice it dropped in like a little, like a sub layer almost below that? Yep. This is a paint layer that's going to tell it where it's going to be white or black. So I'll kind of show you a couple ways to use this. So right now the whole thing's still black. On the left side here is all these buttons. See the one at the top where it says brush, or sorry, paint? It's a little paintbrush. Just click on that for a second. Now when you click on the brush, did you guys notice down in the bottom right, all these new properties just popped up? It's like, oh, what type of brush do you want? What's the size, the flow? It's all those same things we've kind of used before in Photoshop. Let's just try changing a couple of things. Like actually, when you put your brush over the book, do you guys see the same kind of white color I'm getting? Or is yours black?
That's white.
It's probably white. I want to show you guys a couple hotkeys here. This will take some time to get used to. Hold down Command and right click and move back and forth, like left and right. Command, right click, left and right should be making your brush bigger or smaller. If you Command, left click, and holding Command shows you the hotkeys. And if you go Command up and down with your right mouse button, that's your hardness and softness. Left click. It's basically all you need to remember is hold down Command, but between the left and right mouse buttons, and you dragging up or down or left and right will go through the different brush effects you're going to use. So the Command left click back and forth is flow. This one you can't really see, but it's rotating it. If I Command left click and go up and down, it's spinning it. But just click paint anywhere. What happens? Do you guys see that where it's like it's probably painting white and you're seeing like this material just appear? We're making that material show up by painting an alpha. Let's undo it. I don't want you guys to manually paint this thing like everywhere to control where it's going to be. We have a better way because thankfully the way this is UV'd, it's already broken up. This is going to be even easier. So what I want you guys to do is let's go to the split view, which is F1, so you can kind of see the 3D and the 2D view next to each other. And instead of using the brush, the paint, go down to the fourth one called Polygon Fill. This is actually the one you had selected earlier where you were seeing the weird red wireframe. So go to Polygon Fill. You should see like that same thing happening. Once you're on this, look over at the properties. This is very basic. It wants to know what color do you want to fill. We want to fill with white because we already have black everywhere and that's not visible. We need to put white color somewhere. Now from here, it wants you to figure or to kind of tell it how do you want to fill the white color based on triangles. And I'll just kind of show you these real quick. We're not going to use some of them, but here's triangle. Great. Polygon. Also not very pretty looking, right? This one right here is mesh. Now this is one object. That's not going to be helpful. But this one, let me put mouse over it, UV chunk. That's your UV shell. So if you put it to UV chunk, keep it as a white or value, set it to 1. And then in the 2D view, I want you to click on those two pieces right there for the leather. Click, click. And look at what it's doing in 3D. You guys notice how it's now put the leather on just those sections? Yep. Now, let's kind of get rid of this because we're obviously still looking at that kind of red wireframe. To get rid of that, you can either click back on the brush, or if you just simply click off this paint layer that we created, the paint effect, click back on like the group's color and that'll go away. But you guys should be seeing something almost exactly like that. So now we have leather in the right location. We're going to do this again, but this time I want to set this up for the paper. We'll get to the cloth maybe a little bit later. Let's try doing the paper next and fill in this section. So the first thing we want to do is for the next material, let's immediately make a group for the next one. So remember how we did that at the top? Hit that folder button, and I want us to name it. We'll call it like paper group or pages group.
Are you doing the paper right?
Yeah. Paper group.
Because I'm right there and I have no idea.
Okay. We're going to do paper group. Now we want to find a material for this. Let's try to find a material. Now obviously this is not going to have every single material you could ever use. Like, let's see what happens when I'm looking for paper. So I'm going to materials. I'm like, all right, let's see what you got, Painter. Paper. Okay. Pages. Old book stuff. VSD book pages. Not like clearly nothing is here. Now it doesn't mean that we couldn't find one online, but we're talking about the side perspective of a bunch of old pages. That's a really specific thing. Like, I'm not surprised that is not in Painter, right? So we're not going to have everything here, but you'll kind of start learning that when you start looking through some of these presets, we can actually manipulate a bunch of these to give us a really similar effect. Do any of these look like they could be manipulated to maybe look like the pieces of paper? Because look at what this is doing on the side. What are the main characteristics of like the paper?
Wood American cherry.
Really close to that, right? Wood is not far off from that, but that really isn't the big key with this, is getting those like thin horizontal lines, right? And eventually we can put stains and things on it. That can come later. So if I'm just kind of really thinking about it like that, and I start looking here, well, we know the wood ones could be pretty close. So I'm going to type in wood under the search. We have wood American cherry, wood rough, and wood walnut. Now, they all are not bad. We can change the color. This one has some nice lines. This one's kind of cool because it actually has almost like that same rougher quality that's in the reference. This one might also work. It's a little too shiny, but I like some of the horizontal stripes that we're getting out of this. Let's try using wood rough. This is the one I ended up using when I did it. So I want you guys to drag that wood rough material into your paper group. Okay, just give it a second. You'll see it kind of calculate. Here's wood rough.
Perfect, create a new mask.
Right. We'll do masking in a little bit and kind of fix that. Don't worry about that quite yet. Just look at like the side of like the pages where we're expecting that to make the lines. That does not look like paper. It looks like wood. Shocker. It's called wood. So click on the material, look down at the properties, and scroll up until you see this section here where we were kind of changing like UV projection, or we didn't change the scale yet. I want you to hit the little padlock. Like, actually, see what happens when you move the scale button before you undo the padlock? Just move the scale back and forth. What is that doing?
Going back to housing.
It's like a tiling. I heard someone say tiling somewhere. Like, it's tiling it. It's making it repeat, which is also making it smaller. Now, I don't want to make it just bigger, because that just feels like it's smaller wood. That's not really any better. But if I hit the padlock, see how that unlocks horizontal and vertical sliders?
So scaling both U and V at the same
Yeah, when they're locked, they're scaling together. It's like a uniform scale. If you hit the padlock and you unlock this guy, this is going to be your vertical repeating. So let's crank this guy way up. Crank up that second number to like 20. Look what's happening.
Oh.
We are slowly making this turn to paper just by a trick of basically squashing the hell out of the wood material. And this is not a bad starting point. Okay, now one thing we're going to do as well is just look at this guy. The wood has a lot of color variation to it, right? This is much more flatter, a little richer. The color's not right. You guys can go down here. There's color options on the material. The color is kind of this gray looking tone. I'm just going to mess around with like the saturation, make it lighter. And I'm just trying to like move the sliders around until I get something like a little closer. I need to have more red in mine, and it needs to be richer. We're getting there. And this one probably, yeah, so this one's pretty limited. The wood rough, there's not many controls on it. You'll notice how I don't have the ability to like change contrast with this guy. Not a big deal. We can fix that later with some other layers. Now, one thing I'm also going to check is, see how there's like a seam right here in the corner of the paper? Let me just try doing tri-planar to see if it looks any better. And I don't know if that's really, yeah, it's different. Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I don't know if it's necessarily better. I'm going to stick with this. We can always clone stamp like you could in Photoshop and blend that together if we need to do. But I think once we reduce the contrast and add dirt anyway, you're not going to notice that. So just kind of play around with that. Get the pages to look something similar to that. The big thing is trying to match the color from the reference, lightening it up quite a bit. We'll fix the color and stuff later. And one thing, too, I'm not too nuts about is going to be the normal and the height range, like all this stuff at the way bottom. Doesn't that seem a little too bumpy? I mean, especially compared to the reference. Like, it's not that crazy. It's either going to be normal intensity or height. So you kind of have to see which one this guy is going to use. Let me try normal. I'll bring that down. I don't see anything changing. So normal intensity is probably not the one doing it. Let me move the height range. Height range is the one I need to affect. If I crank height range up, that gets way worse. It means I need to go down in height range to like fade out the effect of that kind of normal and height detail. So I'm going to have you guys kind of guide me through this. I want to make the paper only appear on those chunks. Who can kind of walk me through the process to make this folder only have that material on those pieces? Not you, Kobe. Anybody else? Yeah.
Click on the layer first. Wood.
Yep.
Then add a black one.
Yep. At the top, add black mask. Perfect. It disappeared. Okay.
Then change the view to 2D.
Oh yeah, go to like it's 2D or 3D so we can see it. Okay. So far, so good. So let me kind of open these up.
When you click on the mask, when you
Then a Polygon Fill.
Right. So he's talking about using the Polygon Fill. Now, for this to work, what you're saying, Norman, is we need to make the paint layer first. Because we have to make this so when I use the Polygon Fill, it can still paint in something. Because right now, there wasn't really anything on the mask. It's like empty. So click on that mask. Let's add the paint effect to the mask. Make sure you're selecting the mask. Add paint effect. And now we do the Polygon Fill that you were talking about. So on the left side, click on Polygon Fill. We had it set to that UV chunk as a white color, and then you just simply click what you want it to use. I'm just clicking on those three pieces right there. Now, just to kind of show you here that it's easy to fix this even if you mess it up. Like, let's say you did this and you accidentally clicked on that. Like, oh, I clicked on the wrong piece. This should be black, right, for this piece, and I accidentally made it white. How do you think I could make that black if I did mess it up?
Put the slider in black.
Yes, put the slider to black, click on it, and it's black. So you can, like, when you're still in the Polygon Fill, you can move this back and forth and click on any piece to repaint and fill that with whatever color you want. But again, white's visible, black's not visible. If I click back on color, you'll notice now we have some kind of nice pages here. We have leather on the top, and we're kind of on our way. How you guys digging this so far? Not too bad? All right. So this is just kind of getting some of the really basic materials in the right area. Now we're starting to get into some much more precise refinement. So let's kind of look at one of the top views here. The leather isn't on everything, right? It's going to be on a few spots. There's giant chunks where we have fabric. This part is going to be a little different. So for the fabric, I can't just click like UV chunk fill because this is not going to put it on the entire leather part again. This is like a more specific thing where I have to somehow draw the shape to make the leather appear there and the fabric in that section. So let's kind of try this out. We're going to make a way to separate the leather and the cloth. You get stuck with one part?
Yeah, I definitely did. I added the paint layer and my gloss on it too.
All right, let me check what happened real quick. You've got,
I just added.
so you've got it, actually,
I just added
let's
paint
close
layer.
that out. You've got paint, oh, because your paper, oh, you have a group within it. Oh, you have an image. So this actually you don't need at all. You want the mask on the group. So add the paint layer to the folder again, like you just did. You actually had like another group within a group. So no, don't do that. You actually want that paint one. I think you hit the other wrong paint one. Yeah, do this add paint.
Yeah, that's
Yep.
what I just did on.
And now go to like your Polygon Fill. The
Yeah,
fourth one
that's what
down.
I'm trying to remember. Okay.
Yep, click on that. And now it's white. Then you just click on those three lines.
You said we had not like a photo in it. Or we had
Yeah. Yes, you've got it on the material, so drag. I think you can hold Alt or Option and drag it up to the folder. It should copy to it. No, undo. Command. One of those guys will actually move it. Just try single clicking and moving it. I know you can kind of move that to the other one. Shift one of those. It's not big. I mean, you can just even right click and delete the mask and clear it, and then just make a new one on the folder. All right. So most of you guys have seemed like you kind of got this working so far. Let's do this again with the fabric. Okay. So same thing. We're gonna go a little bit faster. No panic. We're gonna go a little bit faster this time. We're gonna make a folder. Same setup. We're gonna call this like fabric group or cloth group, whatever you want. And inside of that, we need to find a material. So let's just kind of look at what we've got here. It's really messy. You can kind of see these faint, see those like diagonal lines from the fabric? It's subtle.
Yeah.
So there's like a weave to it. Let's look for something that would work. So I'm going to go down here. We'll do cloth, nothing.
Fabric suit vintage.
Which one's suit vintage?
That's all
I think
That one looks pretty cool.
Fabric rough.
What else do you guys kind of like?
Fabric rough.
Fabric rough is, this one's kind of cool because I have lined. I think I heard leather rough.
Yeah.
That one's also not bad. There's a bunch of really good ones in here for this thing. Maybe not that one. Unless you want it to look like a couch. Let's not do the sofa effect. So again, I'll let you guys kind of figure out which ones you want. I even like this guy. That one's kind of slick because it has those kind of horizontal or kind of vertical lines we can use. Oh, that one is not bad.
What about soft denim?
That's super.
I was just looking at that one.
Yes, soft denim. I think I'm going to use this denim base. That one I like. I don't even remember if this is the one I used in mine, but I like that one a lot right now. I'm going to use fabric denim base. If you guys have another one you want to try, by all means, go for it. There's nothing wrong with picking a material and deleting it and trying a new one. So I'm going to do fabric denim base and just drag that to the folder. Now, this is, again, covering everything. We'll fix that in a second. Now, I do kind of like the little lines we're getting from it, but I want to rotate it. And I think my big thing is looking at this guy. My lines are way too big and chunky. Like, the details in that reference are way smaller. So how do we scale this thing down or up?
UV scan.
Right. Once you got your material in here, you just select it, look at the properties below.
Unlock.
We don't have to unlock it this time because I just want to do a general
Okay.
scale. So you can leave the padlock there, but we definitely want to scale it up. You should notice that it gets smaller. Now I'm also seeing a seam in mine kind of running down the middle. That's going to kind of go away when we add our dirt detail. But actually, I think it is already rotated at an angle. If you want, you can rotate it. Again, it's kind of subtle, but there's like a diagonal line for this thing. If you do the UV rotation, you should notice it's spinning. So you can also rotate it if you want to have like a slight angle to it. So I'll just rotate it a little bit. We'll maybe go this way. Okay, I like that. That should be fine. And the color is actually not that far off, but if you want, you can go down there. Let's see what properties we have. Pretty much nothing on this guy. It's like, how rough do you want it? And then some really simple normal map and height details. But I can't change the color on this one. We'll fix this in a minute. For now, let's just try to get that masking thing figured out and at least put it in the right spot. So to start off, what pieces should this be visible on? Right. It's the same thing as the leather, right? It's these two pieces. So let's start with that. So we're doing the same thing again. Fabric, click on the group, add your black mask. So on the group, add your black mask. And just like before, when you click on the mask, go to your effects and add a paint effect.
When you add a mask, isn't the red mesh supposed to come up?
No, not necessarily if you're not on that button.
Oh.
If you're on the paint button at the top, it won't be red. Yeah. So add your mask. And remember, the fabric is still on the same pieces as the leather, right? So same thing as before, making sure it's on the UV chunk fill, white color. Just simply click on those two leather pieces in the UVs. And if you want, you can click back on color to kind of see what it looks like. But it should now look like this. Now the fabric is on at least the right pieces. What do you think my next step is from here?
You have to separate where this starts and where the other
Yeah,
texture begins.
right. So there's only going to be so far you can go with those UV kind of fills before you just have to manually get in there and just kind of like force it to be in the right area. We're going to have to do this through some good old painting. So this, yeah, I know. Hooray, painting. So it kind of depends on if we either want to add or remove detail. Now, in this case, what we're trying to do is remove some of the cloth. Because you guys probably have yours above everything like mine is. So the cloth is covering everything. I need to tell it where it's not visible. Now, there's a couple ways to do this. First off, let's just look at the mask and try to visualize it. So there is a way to see this black and white mask on the object. If you hold down the option button and left click on the mask, watch your viewport. I'm going to option click. This is what the mask currently looks like, right? What should be different about this if I don't want the fabric to be like here and on different parts of the top? There's got to be black, right? I need areas where there's just solid black. Its whole thing cannot be white, okay? Now, the good thing about this over here is you can stack a ton of these different layers together to eventually form the final effect. Right now, it looks all white. We're going to start painting black. So all I've done is I've option left clicked on the mask just to view it.
Your folder is closed, but you have two icons there. When I click on it, I only have one.
Like that?
Well, you still have two icons.
Where's your mask for the fabric?
It's on the next the layer below.
Oh, so you have your mask on the material.
Right.
Yeah, you want it on the group. So what you can, if you want, I think you can copy these guys. I was trying to do this earlier. That makes a duplicate. Where is it? I think if you like right click on the mask on your material, you can pick copy mask. And I think if you go to your group, you should be able to right click and paste mask. You may have to make a new black mask first. It's always easy to delete these. You can always delete the mask, like right click, clear it, and just do it on the group above it. I would just like clear it out completely. Like just right click on the mask and just do clear or remove mask. Just to like get rid of it off the material. To remove it?
Yeah.
Okay, now go to your group and add the black mask to the group. And then you're going to add the little paint effect to it and try to do it on the folder, not the material.
Oh, that's an effect.
What's that?
What's the difference between that?
So yeah, so good question, because I know some of you guys probably also have the same thing where the mask is on the material, and it probably looked totally fine doing it that way. The reason why I'm doing it the way we kind of have it set up now is if you had this mask on the material, and let's say above it you wanted to add like dirt on the fabric, the dirt, because it's a different layer, would not understand to only be on the fabric, and now you're putting dirt on everything. But if you make a dirt material in here and it's in the same group, anything in this group will only be visible in those areas. So it's almost like a way for you to make multiple textures and materials all appear in the same spot. That way you're not duplicating that mask 20 times for like, all these different layers. So this will now make sure everything in here will have the same thing. It'll make more sense once we do more materials. This is like one material per folder, so it's not very complicated.
So once I created a new mask, I want to add a paint.
Yeah, click on it, add a paint, and then you're gonna, once you make the paint thing, you click on it, and you need to go to that Polygon Fill on the left side. And you're just gonna click on your UV shells and make it white.
On the pages.
Yeah, on the leather part. Yeah. Okay. We're gonna keep moving here. Let's add a new paint layer to manually control where we see the leather. It's gonna be a little tricky, but you're gonna click on the mask, go up here, and I want you to add a new paint effect. So the same mask, you're adding another paint effect to it. You're gonna see it stack above the other one. Nothing's changed yet because it's empty. Remember how we were saying earlier we want to paint black to kind of remove pieces of the fabric? That's what we're going to try doing. I think because just of the way this is UV'd, it might be a little easier to do this in the 2D space rather than you painting in 3D. So one thing we're going to do as well is change the way we're viewing the material. Because see how like with the material view, that bottom part's really dark because it's like in shadow, right? Hit the C key on your keyboard and watch what that does. Like hit C a couple times. This is cycling through the material properties. So C is your material properties, B are the mesh maps, M is the material. So they're all at the bottom of your keyboard, C, B, M. But what I want you to do is hit C until you find the base color. Or if you don't like the hotkeys, if you have something against that, you can just pick base color at the menu and pick it that way. But pick base color. It should look pretty much like this. Okay? This is just your solid color map, very flat. We're going to paint black. So a couple of things we want to do. When you click on your brush up here in the top left, go down to your brush properties, and at the way bottom of your brush properties, mine's auto-saving, change the color to black. It's at the way bottom. You have to scroll past a bunch of stuff. Make that black. We're painting black. Now, the other thing I want to do is make the brush a lot sharper, right? I don't want to have a fuzzy edge. It needs to be either leather or cloth. So I'm going to command right click. Left and right is to make it bigger. I'm going to make it smaller. Command right click up and down is sharpness. And if you guys, again, have trouble with the hotkeys, if you hold down Command, it will tell you the different hotkeys. You just have to practice and get used to it. And the other option is if you, for some reason, feel like you're struggling with any of the hotkeys, you could change it in the properties. A lot of that stuff is still in here. Flow, size, but I just want something nice and hard.
She said.
Nice.
Flow is that go into the sharpest even though I'm at like 100? Like when I shift command left click?
When you command left click?
Yeah, it's supposed to like make the edges softer.
No, that's flow. This is command right click and up and down.
Okay.
Yeah, command right click up and down with your mouse. Yeah, flow is a little different. Flow isn't a hardness. Flow is like, actually, let me show you flow real quick. So I'm going to do command left click and bring down my flow a lot. See how it kind of looks almost like it's partially transparent? When I paint, see there's like a feathering to it? So it's almost like you're painting with like a chalky effect where it builds value slowly instead of you just painting with a marker where it's just like immediately that color. So it kind of builds value. Let's bring that up. I'm going to put my flow back up pretty high, and we're going to kind of like make the lines first. So let's try doing like a vertical line for the bind right here. So just look at this. See, there's like a giant chunk of leather. We need to make the defining line right there. I'm going to bring my brush down a little bit by command right clicking, and it's going to take a couple tries to get it perfect. But what you're going to do is you're going to hold down Shift. See what's happening when I hold the Shift key down? See that line? Shift will draw between 2 points. So this is how you make straight lines. So it takes a little practice, but what I want you to do is put your mouse kind of near where mine is at the top. Click once to set your point. It should look like a little dot like that. Just click, hold Shift, move your mouse to the bottom. You can kind of see the path it's going to draw, and click near the bottom. You see it make like a stripe?
You need to hold shift first, because if I click and then held shift, it just started drawing.
You click. You don't have to hold down your mouse button. All you do is you tap to set your starting point, hold Shift, and then you do a second tap at the bottom. Yeah, it's a little weird.
Make sure you're zoomed out too. You move the camera, it gets a little weird.
Yeah. And all we're really doing is, again, setting where the leather should start. Like, what do you guys think about that? Like, is that, because we can paint in here to fill that in, but is that edge right there, does that seem about right? What do you think? Maybe too far out?
A touch out.
Maybe like push it in more, you think? Maybe. So I'm going to undo it. Nothing wrong with that. I'll go in a little farther. Click, hold Shift.
Wouldn't it be easier to make first the spine and then start moving?
Say it again, sorry?
Start with the spine and then start moving out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You could, exactly. You could kind of keep making the lines and build your way out if you want to do that. And instead of like setting the edge point, you can work your way from the center out. But you're totally right. So it takes a little practice, but just look at the 3D. You're just kind of analyzing like the distance. Like I think that feels okay where I've got it. And because I'm looking at my 2D and 3D at the same time, I think what I want to do is set up the other part. Like this chunk over here is the bottom of the book. This is the underside. So I'm going to try the same thing. I'm just going to click and hold Shift and just see, look at the position of that. See how I'm not in the right spot on this side? I went way too far over. So let's undo it. Shift, click. Almost there. I just need to move it over a little bit.
It just stopped working for me. Shift click.
It's just stopped working.
Yeah, it's not
It's not
matching.
showing anymore.
Is that everyone else seeing that too? Where the lines disappeared?
No, my hotkey.
Let me
Doesn't go away.
let me check.
Really.
I haven't seen the line disappear before.
Yeah, so it like shift.
Oh, I think it's because you're not on the paint layer. So if you get so that make a new paint effect. So if you go up top, like on that, do the left, yeah, that guy, hit paint. You might have undone back before you did it. And then try it again. And then, yeah, there it is. That might be the same thing. So if you, yeah, you're working. Yep, you got it.
So how do we get rid of that, pop-up?
Let's see. Oh, yeah, that, unfortunately, I don't have a way to get rid of it. There might be something in the settings to remove, like, the little tooltips. Yeah, if you go in the preferences, I haven't really looked for it yet, but there might be some way to disable that. Have you ever done that, Kobe? Like, turn off the little tooltips?
Oh.
Where, like, the command shift stuff keeps popping up?
No, it shows up every time I try to take a screenshot.
Yeah, it's annoying. Yeah, it was doing that when I was taking screenshots of the project for the documentation. It like keeps popping this thing up. Like, we're good. I get the hotkeys. It might be buried in the preferences. I haven't honestly looked into it yet. But I'm just kind of looking at it, and I feel like these are pretty close to where I want. Like, I'm kind of happy with that. And once you kind of set the edge point, you can just simply like use your brush and just quickly fill in the rest.
Is there a way to move over the edge point?
Like if it's not in the right spot.
Yeah. Do you like select that and move it over, or you?
There are translate options, but it's a translate filter. But I would just repaint it. I'm just filling all that in. That feels about right. Pretty happy with that. And I know, like, obviously we're not going to get through all this. So in just a little bit, I might do like the gold trim to kind of get that set up. And I think in the lab, what I'll do is I'll just continue. We'll do a new recording, and I'll show you guys how to start adding like dirt layers, grunge, and a bunch of other things to break up the details. We're just kind of doing some of the easier stuff right now, just laying out material presets in different areas. But let's kind of look at this again. What is the one thing that I'm sort of missing with like the leather?
The corners.
Corners, yeah, right? We got this guy pretty good. Corners are not where I want it. And let me see if there's leather on the edge. Does that paper, or not the paper, but the fabric does continue on the underside where the lip is?
Yeah.
Taped.
Yeah, it might be, but this for sure I have to get work in the corner pieces. So this one is going to mean I need to do some diagonal straight lines. And if I find a better shot of the top, you'll see it's not just a diagonal line. Oh, actually, wait a minute. Where's the
Yes.
book? Did I do it wrong when I did it?
Yes, you did. 'Cause I just
Oh my
decided not
goodness.
to.
Ha! How about that? In my example of the project, I, for some reason, didn't even do it that way. Oops. Look what I did.
Oh,
Well, I like mine better. I actually made straight lines, and I don't know why I did that now.
Oh, it is
Weird.
straight lines. On the actual book, it is straight lines.
in your render.
Probably because with the circle brush, it's a lot easier to do that shape than it is to make a straight line.
Yeah, that's odd.
It looks better though. It's like more.
Yeah, I'm not really too concerned about it because clearly I didn't follow the reference. But not a big deal. I'll maybe kind of do it just like the triangle, kind of set up like it is in the photo instead of my way. But I'm just going to go over here. I'm going to bring the brush down and just, again, do the same thing. And I just kind of want to see if I can get something pretty good here. Just holding shift and making a diagonal cut. How does that feel? Let's go back to the reference, not my image. That's actually pretty close. Might be a little too big. And do that. And I'm doing it as much as I can in 2D. One thing too, like I don't know if you guys have noticed when you move your brush around, if you notice how the shape is like erratically popping near the edge of the shell.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is because when you're painting under the brush properties, it wants to know if you're trying to paint in 3D, 2D, do you want the brush to overlap and blend between two shells? I think if we change it to UV, it won't do that because I'm primarily painting in 2D. Yeah. It's not as bad. Let's see if I can do camera. That's also going to pop. Camera planar, that's also doing it.
UV does it.
Yeah, UV is not that bad. Oh God, that looked terrible. There we go. Yep. Let's not use UV. That is super chunky. Wow. Yeah, mine is hopping around pretty bad right now.
I used to brush from the JRO album. Why is it hopping around that much? Do you have jitter on there?
I want. Yeah, let me see if jitter's on. Jitter's off.
Turn the size space on your brush. Set it to viewport.
Let's try that out. Oh, that's it.
It's constantly trying to, like, if your cursor goes on like the angle of the mesh, it tries to keep the same size, but it kind of distorts the 3D space.
Yep, that is totally it. So what he's talking about is a little bit farther down with alignment, size space. This is what, yeah, it was basically trying to like curve and like bend according to the geometry. The viewport, this is actually what I thought the UV one was going to do, but this now it's kind of locked into the same size. Still not super clean, and I can kind of trim this up, but for the most part, it's working. That tooltip is great. It's a good time. And even if it's like you're having issues, you can go in there, you can set it to white. Keep in mind, you could do like the inverse color and try like painting to like trim out sections. And mine needs to be quite a bit bigger. Black. We'll go with that. I'm just going to quickly paint and kind of fill all this in. And I'm also just going back and forth between black and white, because if I go to white, I can then do the opposite, and I can try to clean up some of these lines by painting the other color. So like,
when you try to like clean up that edge by doing that,
yeah.
There's no way for it to just kind of like cut on that line. You're basically using like that whole like brush size.
Right. Oh, you mean like just use like the
Just use that.
yeah, it's basically using the width, the diameter of the brush. So yeah.
To kind of judge how far over
Ye-
you're doing.
Yep, yeah. It takes a little trial and error to kind of get that. And we'd end up like repeating that for the other pieces. I'm going to like, I think kind of move on to something else though, so we're not just standing here painting triangles until we're out of the class. We still have about 5 or 10 minutes. But I think you guys kind of get the idea. Just go to that layer. If you're ever unsure, by the way, which layer is which, right? Because there's 2 paint layers. They have visibility. Turn the visibility on and off if you're trying to understand what one is, controlling what. This was the one for the Polygon Fill, or for the UV shell fill. This is us manually painting to remove areas.
We can name the paint layers.
Yeah, you can name them. Yep. The naming gets a little weird with some of the filters, like the, I think the filter effects. Some of those you can't rename, but yeah, this one you can. So I'm going to hit M and go back to material, but that's starting to look pretty good. Zoom in. All right, let's see. Let's just try to really quickly set up the gold. Because we can always come back to this and do the other pieces. I do want to show you like the gold part real fast, and then we will get out of here and we'll pick this up in the lab and we'll talk about some refinement. So I'm going to kind of get out of the folders. One thing we probably should have done a long time ago is saved our project.
I was just about to ask you, because when you save, where do you save to, like, source images or?
No, I would probably save it in that same folder we set up with the FBX file. Yeah, because that's going to be kind of containing everything. Let's all save our painter project.
It doesn't work like Maya where you choose a scene file and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm going to go to File. We're going to do Save As. And I'm going to go navigate back to that project. Painter, there's my book. Same area where I have the FBX file. I'm just going to save this as book. So this is a book .spp. Substance Painter project. And you probably noticed it's been auto-saving like every so often for you anyway. It's pretty good about that. Sometimes it's a little annoying because it will auto-save a lot. You almost think it's going to crash, but it's not crashing. It's saving.
Do we gotta create a new folder?
No. I would just, like, I'm putting it literally in the same folder that I put the FBX file. So I don't know if you did that earlier, Norman, where you have like a book folder.
Oh, yes, I did it earlier. Oh, it's,
Yeah, I'm just putting it in that same book folder. So the FBX, that object file, and the painter project are all in the same spot. So if I had like other alphas or textures I was going to use, I would drop those in there as well.
we started book material.
Yeah, just call it, oh, you can call it book material if you want. Love it. Okay, let's just try doing the gold since we're kind of on a roll now, getting like the brushes figured out. The gold is really similar. Like, I think once you lay out the leather, you guys probably know the gold's the same thing. We're just drawing like a thin, straight line, like right where the border is. So it's going to be pretty simple. What we're going to do is above everything, we're going to make a new folder. I'll call this gold group for the gold trim. And we're going to look for a gold material. Gold pure.
Is this one of those programs where you gotta put underscores on everything?
I don't think so.
I'm just in the habit of doing it all the time.
Yeah, I kind of do that as well. I don't think it matters though. Yeah, I'm just going to take the gold pure material. It's not actually gold, by the way. Like, clearly that's not real gold in the book. If it is, I would have like pawned that off a long time ago. Okay, but let's just move that in the folder. Here's gold pure.
Wow.
Yeah. Now there's one really interesting thing happening here.
Mine doesn't look like that. Mine's like just solid block of yellow.
Oh, you're probably still on, yeah, you're on base color. Yeah, I hit M a while ago to go back to material. So I'm looking at the material again. There's my beautiful gold. Now, I'm kind of curious here. Do you guys think you already know what visually is a little bit concerning that's happening with the gold preset?
It's taking on a roughness.
Yeah. And this has been happening the whole time, but you'll notice how when I drop this in here, the material for some reason is picking up the normal and height data from the stuff below it, right? And we're going to, yeah, like, so the leather is showing through. I've got like that cloth, that pattern is showing up. It looks kind of interesting, but I don't really want that. What should the gold be doing for, like, if you think of the height detail?
Will you disable the pass-through?
Yeah, I need to change like a blend mode, like, and I need to somehow get this gold like trim. Shouldn't it be like a very thin lip that just kind of like lifts up off of everything? Right? It should be above all that. It shouldn't absorb the height detail from the stuff below it. Now, if you look at the material, look what's missing. There, notice how it's made up of color, roughness, and metallic. There's no height. So let's try this. Click on your material. You guys see where it has that gray height button that's not currently turned on? Turn on the height for the gold. Okay? Nothing yet. I'm going to hit C to go through my channels. Let's look at it. Don't see anything. Okay. What we're going to do is try to find out what's happening with the height and normal details through here. So if I click on the layers, we're currently looking at base color blend modes, like how the different color channels are combining. I'm going to go to height up at the top. And this is a little more kind of involved because this gets into like all the Photoshop blend modes, like overlay, add, screen, multiply. But what's happening right now is anytime you make a new material in Painter, most of them default to this thing called linear dodge, which just adds height data together. So all the height is just adding and adding and adding. Let me try changing this to normal. I have to do this. Actually, I don't even know if I have height on any of these guys below it. They might all be normal. Let me try one more thing real quick.
I changed it to the group and it worked.
Oh, on the group. I bet that is exactly what it was. I bet you're right. Is it normal? Oh, there it is. I had it turned off again. Yeah. So this thing right here, it's actually not the material. It's the actual blend mode for the group. If you just change this to, make sure you're under height, put it to normal, and that's essentially making the entire group's height data just cover what's beneath it, not add on top of it. And it's very flat now. This is just almost like perfect gold. But now I can do a mask and draw a line. We're just going to do one line just so you can kind of see it. So on that group, add a black mask. You're going to see the gold disappear. Okay. And then what did we do before? Have the mask selected. Go up here. Click on paint. You're going to make a paint effect for that mask. And we need to paint white, right? These really thin lines of white. So click on the paint, brush. It's already set to a white color. And I'm just going to do one of them just so you can kind of see it. We'll kind of zoom in. I want my brush to be a lot smaller for this one. And thankfully, since I have that other leather one already set, I sort of know where this is going to go. I'm going to click at the top, hold shift, and just draw right down the side. That is way too thick. So I'm going to bring my size down even more. So this is going to be pretty thin. Oops. There we go.
Start at the bottom because it's freaking pop-up structure.
There's one thing that's kind of interesting too is now that I've just kind of drawn like this really thin white line just in one section just to kind of see it, if you ever click back on the group and you kind of navigate back to your material for gold, you know how I turned on like that height property data? Like that wasn't part of the gold material when we initially made it. If you scroll down, did you guys see that height slider on the gold material? It's probably set to 0. Move that around and watch your viewport. Look what's happening. It's trying, like right now, look what's happening to the gold. When I go in negative height, it's pushing in. If you go up in positive number, it's beveling out. So we're almost like telling it in height, 0 is no change. Positive or negative will push down or up. This is on the gold material. and make sure you have height turned on, and just look for the height slider. And you don't really need to push it too far, but if you wanted to, you could just kind of artistically play around with that until you feel like you have like a kind of a subtle lip to the gold trim. A slider? Make sure you have the height button turned on, because it's off by default. We're just adding a height property, so I have the ability to control the height for the gold trim.
We're supposed to be on the paint or on the color, not the mask?
On the color. Yeah, not on the mask. Like we're going back to the material.
Okay, there we go.
Yep. And then you can move the height around. You should see it forming like a little lip.
So,
Okay. So we've actually got through like a pretty good amount of stuff here, just as far as masking and some of the basics. There's a lot of stuff we haven't got to. Like there's a lot of damage and things we want to do to the like the leather, to the fabric. But do you guys feel pretty comfortable as far as like the paint layers and how we're doing that stuff?
yeah.
Kinda. It just keep practicing at it. I'm going to kill the recording for the lecture for this one right now. And in the lab, I'm going to show you guys how to do some of the finer details. And then we'll probably only do that for maybe like another hour in the lab, just to kind of go over a few other things. Once I'm through the integrated part of the lab and I run through the second set of tools for you, you're going to spend the rest of the lab just practicing and refining. And if you ever get stuck, you guys have the link to that substance playlist, that video playlist. If you start clicking through those, you'll see a ton of different techniques that he's using that we can also use. Brushes, clone stamps, procedurals, everything he does in that tutorial, we can still apply to this guy. All right, let's save our scene. We're going to say we're good with the lecture, and I will see you guys in the lab in an hour at 5:45.
Did you add a new